Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, YouTubers. This is Jerry Diamond with How to Get Out of Babylon. Okay, I gotta put that on. Okay, lights out. Chapter 27. I'm gonna have to read it in sections so they can load. By the time the meeting in Mark's front yard rolled around, most everyone had heard about what happened with John. The news hadn't brought them any new subjects to discuss. Just a couple more East Coast cities under martial law. Who cares? So the main topics were the tiller and the guard training program. Mark asked George and his committee to present their plan for tilling the private gardens. George started out with some good news. Chaparro had fixed the broken tiller. He'd used a motorcycle chain and machined new drive gears. Chaparro had warned them they needed to be careful, as he didn't think the new chain and gears were quite as strong as the old ones. George announced they had over half of the 5-acre field ready and that they'd begin planting it in corn soon. He then broke the bad news that they had been unable to get the tractor at the tree farm to run. He did tell them Chaparro was working on a hitch so that perhaps plowing could be done with Mark's Jeep, but it would be a few days before they knew if that would work. He then went on to explain that they had moved the working tiller to till the private gardens of the 3 people who had lent their tillers to the neighborhood. He explained that it only seemed fair to take care of those people first. The committee's plan for the other 44 households was to hold a lottery. Each homeowner would, if the group accepted this plan, select a number from 1 to 44. Then they would till about a quarter acre for each in the order of their numbers. George figured they could have everyone's first plot tilled in 10 or 12 days. Then, when they got done with the 44th person, they would start over with number 44 and work their way back down to 1, doing another quarter acre, and keep going like this until everyone had the land they wanted tilled. Then they'd move back to work on the empty lots. The community voted on and accepted the gardening committee's plan. George announced that they already had numbers in a hat and that the homeowners could pull them as soon as the meeting was adjourned. Mark then spent a few minutes explaining that John had decided not to run the guard training program. Gunny would be taking over that along with the scheduling, and would all the guards please report to him after the meeting for instructions. When Mark announced that he'd be working on 2 more barrel showers tomorrow, a huge cheer went up. No one had anything else, so the meeting was adjourned. Mark asked Jess to pull their number, and she drew 28. Gunny asked Mark to meet the trainees at 8 o'clock at Abby's to stretch them out and give them a very light workout. When all of the chores were done, everyone played games for a while and then went to bed. When Mark woke up the next morning, he found that it was drizzling. He skipped his run since he'd be working out with the guards in a while. Gunny and Abby came over for breakfast and made an offer to George and Alice. They asked the displaced couple to move into the guest room in their house. The Garretts graciously accepted, and since all of their possessions had burned, they moved with one quick trip after breakfast. Mark thought it was very generous of the newlyweds to offer to share their home. It would also help Jim and Lisa to have a little more privacy in their camper. Gunny, Mark, and George all had duties that prevented them from going to the store today, so Jim was elected to lead the same group to the store as yesterday. Sam decided to stay home and finish her food inventory. Chaparro came by to pick up the Jeep. He and Bill were going to look at the tractor. And then he was going to work on the 3-point hitch. Manny also came by to pick up a truck to take the shoppers to town. George headed out to start on private garden number 1, and Gunny and Mark went to meet the guards. Mark did a long, slow stretch out with them. Most were quite sore from the day before, and Mark could smell the Bengay when the breeze blew in the right direction. Then he had the men do a few push-ups and sit-ups. They also slowly ran half a mile, and then walked about half a mile. Most of the men said they were feeling better by the time they were done, and they thanked him. Mark then went back to the house to work on the other 2 showers. He decided to put them right beside the first one. He and David got the barrels up on the roof and then started improving the shower stalls and building a bench inside each one. When that was done, they went to Chaparro's and told him that the showers were ready to be plumbed and asked him to please fill the barrels before he got the generator. He told Mark he would. He said Will had agreed to let him take the hitch off the tractor to use on the Jeep. All he had to do was machine the mounts and figure out a way to raise and lower it. He said he might have it ready by Wednesday. Mark bragged on him, but reminded him that the fence crew was depending on him for some metal posts to finish the fence and the big pipes to block the drive. Chaparro said he'd get those done first and then get back on the hitch. Mark and David walked on down to the entrance and helped dig some more. The ditch was almost done, and Susan, with Gunny's help, had marked where the other foxholes should go. When the men had finished the ditch and had gone back over the few spots Gunny thought needed attention, they started on the foxholes. While Mark was digging, one of the guards came up to him. "Mark, there are some people at the gate asking if we could give them some food," the guard said. Mark put his shovel down and walked to the gate with the guard. When he got there, he saw 2 young couples of 5 children ranging in age from about 3 to 10. All of the adults and the 3 older children had backpacks. The 2 men were also carrying a large duffel bag each. The 2 smaller children were being pulled in a small wagon by one of the women. The other woman was pulling a larger wagon that was full. Mark introduced himself and asked where they were going. One of the men told Mark they had a friend with about 40 acres in Gonzales. He went on to explain that they were neighbors in an apartment complex and it was getting too dangerous to stay there. They decided to walk to their friend's place, hoping to cover the 70-odd miles in 3 days. They'd only made about 12 miles yesterday and were going even slower today as everyone was sore. The group had brought enough food for 4 days, one more than they thought they'd need, but now it looked like it might take 6 or even 7 days to get there. He asked if anyone could spare any food to help them. Mark called David over and asked him to run up to the house and get 3 pounds each of beans and rice and 6 large cans of fruit. While David was gone, Mark and the guards chatted with the travelers about conditions in town. They told the same types of stories that Mark had been hearing from others. David was back in a few minutes with a grocery bag in each hand. He handed the food to the man who had done most of the talking, and they all thanked Mark and the others and started moving slowly east. Mark and David went back to the foxholes. There were 4 to be dug, and they were big enough for 6 or 7 men each. With the amount of men who were working, they had them finished in just a few hours. Mark looked at his watch. It was a little after 4. It had stopped drizzling around lunchtime, but the sky was still cloudy. It wasn't as hot as it had been, but it was extremely humid, and all of the diggers were covered in dirt and sweat. Susan told the men that they were done for the day. She told them that she might have some more work for them tomorrow. Mark told the men that the old shower should be hot enough that if they wanted to use it now, they were welcome to it. Mark and his son walked back to their house. On the way, they stopped by the house where George was supervising the tilling. Mark asked him how it was going, and his answer was, "Not bad." He explained that the tiller Chaparro had fixed had a tendency to throw the chain if they got it going too fast, so they had to keep it under half speed. George told him it looked like they'd get the 2 plots done with the good tiller, and 1 or 1.5 done with the repaired one, not the 5 he'd hoped. He explained to Mark that he needed more men. A couple of his guys had been working all day with only the breaks he made them take. Mark told him they were through with the ditch and the foxhole, so they could probably send some men to help with these jobs tomorrow. George also expressed concern that most of the residents didn't have any seeds to plant. They needed to go back to the feed store and get what everyone wanted, if possible. When Mark got back home, the shoppers were back and the women were fixing dinner. Sam was adding what they brought into her inventory. Mark asked her how they were looking as far as food went. She said her figures showed that they could eat pretty well for 11 weeks. After that, it would be mostly beans and rice every day for another 5 weeks before they were completely out of food. Mark thought that was good. He felt they needed to talk about whether to buy more beans, rice, and other staples for a longer period, or to buy more variety for another few weeks. He wished now that they'd kept a few months' worth of food stored, or even a year, as he'd heard Mormon families did. He certainly could see the wisdom of that now. Jess asked if they could use the generator to wash and dry a couple loads of clothes. Mark told her that Chaparro was using it, but when he brought it back, they were more than welcome. He asked if they would hang the clothes out to dry instead of using the generator for that. She said they could, but they would need to wash early in the morning so the clothes would hang long enough to dry. Jim suggested that some of the less dirty clothes could be washed and rinsed in the tub they'd brought to further save on fuel for the generator. The girls reluctantly agreed to try a load or two that way tomorrow. Mark wanted to check on the showers. He found that Chaparro had plumbed them and filled the 2 new ones. Mark checked the water temperature in all 3. The old one was lukewarm. The other 2 were just warm enough that the water wasn't chilly. Without the sun shining directly on them, the barrels seemed to heat up only a little more than air temperature. Well, he'd have no problem with anyone staying in too long now today, he thought. A few of the men were walking up to use a shower, and he suggested that they use the middle one.